The only thing that I think is going to be interesting is Chris Godwin, I think will have to play a little bit more on the outside to get Emeka Egbuka on the field. Do you have any sort of lean there, Jim, about where you think Godwin's going to get lined up? Because if you tell me Godwin's going to have the exact same slot usage as last year, I'll say, okay, I'm in on Godwin.
It goes back to Jarvis Landry that Baker Mayfield has done really well with the slot receivers. And I believe, this is what my gut tells me. Look, this new coach is coming in, Josh Grizzard. I know he was with the team last year, but I think the veterans are going to speak on this. I think the veterans, when they were team meetings, I think Baker Mayfield's going to make it a point that Chris Godwin's in the slot when needed. I believe that they're going to push this because they know how good their offense is.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
New offensive coordinators. We've got 12 of them this year in the NFL. We're taking a bird's eye view, looking at each of them, talking about the general vibes with each offense and players who could get aided by new offensive schemes and situations. Theo Greminger for Fantasy Points with Fantasy Football Daily. Today, I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Jim Coventry of RotoWire. If you're not following Jim, you really should be. Jim is one of the real ball knowers in the fantasy football space. Totally breaks down both sides of the ball, extensive knowledge of NFL coverages, and is the perfect guest for this sort of show. Got to start to take a look at some of these new offenses. Sort of questionable situations, changing situations can often provide big ADP wins, but oftentimes they can disappoint us significantly if we get too excited about these. How are you doing today, Jim?
Oh, it's always a great time to talk football.
100%. Let's just get this thing started. I think that my big interesting takeaway when I look at the new offensive coordinators in the NFL is you have an extensive amount of coaches from the now Dan Campbell tree. You also have as we see every offseason, the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay tree. We see 3 more of those in new spots. So half of the coaches we're going to talk about are coming from 2 specific situations / organizations, any way you want to cut it. Very, very interesting stuff. It's a copycat league, but the NFL is really chasing sort of what works. Why don't we get started with the McVay Shanahan coaching tree? This is always the interesting one. One of the names that I was most interested in discussing today was Nick Caley, but you have some apprehension about him really elevating things in Houston. The Bobby Slowick situation last year, Jim, I don't know if we've ever seen an offensive coordinator as steamed up in his reputation one year and then completely exposed the following season when it comes to Bobby Slowick. Houston was a team that got people in a lot of trouble last year. Joe Mixon was an ADP winner. Nico Collins was pretty much gave you what you bought, what you expected as an ADP price tag. Everything else was sort of a disaster, namely CJ Stroud, who steamed up into a top 6 ADP at the quarterback spot. Really this year, massive correction. He's being drafted inside of mid QB2 land. They've done a lot to add to the passing game this offseason, drafted 2 wide receivers on day 2, traded for Christian Kirk, big changes on the offensive line. What are your expectations for Nick Caley?
So you started out talking about Bobby Slowick. Go back 2 years ago and why CJ Stroud had the year he did. Well, they did it because it was a classic 49ers offense. They ran heavy personnel with a fullback. It's critical. When they ran the fullback, defenses had to bring the defender down from the safety position. Downfield shots were plentiful for Stroud. Well, the offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick, got hung out to dry last year. His general manager cut all his fullbacks. So therefore, they had to put Slowick as a 49er Shanahan-type coach into an 11 personnel 3 receiver offense. He had no chance. He was not trained in that. Somebody could have a chance, but they took him out of the water. He was a fish. They took him out of the water and said, all right, breathe and swim. Couldn't do it. So CJ Stroud really was the loser in that one. So like you said, Nick Caley comes in. Now, Nick Caley, like you mentioned, from the McVay tree. So this could be a very different offense. This is going to probably be 3 receiver sets. Now, they ran a lot of those last year. Receivers will block more. That'll help their run game. It'll help their offensive line, but it'll also scheme up a lot of quick throws. So that'll be good. But here's one thing I want to caution with McVay's disciples. They don't always follow him to a T. Now, Zach Robinson with the Falcons, he kind of has. The Falcons were first in the league with 86% in 3 receiver sets last year. McVay is normally at the top of the league. That was kind of an easy one. But Liam Coen, he was a disciple of McVay. He was only at 71% 3 receiver sets. He definitely integrated the run game more than McVay, and McVay does like balance, but Coen made that a little more of a staple. Zach Taylor out in Cincinnati, he only runs those 3 receiver sets 60% of the time. So the people who have come from McVay have taken some ideas, but the only one that's really classically run it for the most part, and even the receiver blocking is not quite there, is Robinson. So the disciples are weird. Here's the problem. Nick Caley has no serious coaching experience. Yes, he's been able to learn, but he's not been a play caller, and that's huge. So when he comes in here, adjustments are what make these coaches. And if you don't have that experience of play calling, defensive coordinators are going to adjust to what you do. And if you don't have the answer, basically your week 1 mode is stuck. Remember Ryan Grubb last year? That was the problem. I told you that preseason. Don't be excited about Ryan Grubb. He'll come out hot, but he'll have no adjustments when the coaches on the other team adjust to him, and he didn't. I see the same problem here.
We actually butted heads on Ryan Grubb last offseason. I was way more enthusiastic about Grubb than you were. I remember this sort of conversation. This was a guy coming from Washington, made this huge impact as a collegiate offensive coordinator, comes to the league. I'm like, we're checking off all these boxes. It's exciting, mystery box, and you were very sobering, and you were correct, Jim. So I'll take the L on that one. Interesting when it comes to Caley. When we talked about the run game and the extra blockers and using the receivers as blockers, is that sort of a Joe Mixon is well priced at ADP and Mixon is going to deliver for a second season? Is Mixon in a good spot for you? Or is it a Nico Collins could maybe benefit from we've seen the guy hit 17.5 points per game like 2 years in a row, left wanting just a little bit more because this is a player that we believe is very, very talented, alpha wide receiver profile. If you were betting on a player in Houston returning value this year, what would be your preferred pick when we put into context? Nico Collins is going to cost you an early second round pick. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 8, whereas Joe Mixon, despite his very strong season last year, still a very affordable price tag player, being drafted around like running back 17, which puts you in towards the tail end of the 4th round oftentimes.
So I will answer both of those, but I'll start with option C. I'll start with CJ Stroud. He's the big winner. CJ Stroud, I mentioned why he had a bad year last year, but that was actually for long term. It was a good thing because he's going to learn. He learned a lot last year because he was put at a disadvantage. And even though he didn't have the best fantasy season, he learned. He learned what it's like to face 2 high safeties and have to live in that world. The league adjusted to CJ Stroud. He didn't get any help. I believe CJ Stroud is a superstar quarterback. I believe he's closer to what we saw as a rookie than what we saw last year. And I believe Stroud will make adjustments. So regardless of the coach, I think with the receiving weapons they have, Stroud has it. And if you notice, Theo, in the 2 playoff games that the Texans played, Stroud, who normally doesn't run, he ran for at least 40 yards in both of those games. He might be opening up another element of his game. Now you speak to Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon has been the exact same guy about 6 years running. If he was in Cincinnati, if he was in Houston, didn't matter. He's always like 3.9 to 4.1 yards per carry. He gets a heavy rushing volume. He's active in the passing game, but I think Woody Marks could take some of that passing game away. Mixon is still like 29. So he's not like over the hill yet, but something's going to creep up kind of quick. I think as you're intimating at ADP, I think he's a fine floor pick. The line is they trade away Laramie Tunsil. That didn't help. The line wasn't good last year. Mixon did slow down in the second half of the season. His numbers were down. But I think you're pointing out he's a value pick because the volume will be there. Marks will get some work, but Joe Mixon does real specific dirty work. And I think that dirty work's going to be needed.
Yeah, Stroud's an interesting one because we've seen his value shift down in Dynasty, let alone redraft. It could be a potential bounce back. I'm glad you brought up Woody Marks. Super interesting. Had over 250 catches as a collegiate. What's interesting is you add Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins to go along with Christian Kirk. This is a very strong wide receiver room for CJ Stroud. So I think that a lot of this offseason was based on getting CJ Stroud back on track. Super interesting one. Now, with Nick Caley, we have no sample size. With Liam Coen, we have a really strong sample size. Liam Coen last year, I would say, is an innovator. Averaged 29 points per game as an offense coordinator, top 5 scoring team in football last year. Really made his mark. Early in the year, he bumped Chris Godwin back inside. We saw Godwin under Dave Canales play predominantly on the outside. We also saw an embrace of Bucky Irving, who was really perfect for his scheme. Irving was more of a big play threat than we ever saw with Rachaad White, who was really, really good as sort of a compiler in 2023. But that was a lot of Liam Coen sort of embracing that sort of running back. Obviously, Mike Evans towards the tail end of the season, and Baker Mayfield over 40 touchdown passes. So do we have the same kind of vibes in Jacksonville, or do you have real apprehension about this offensive line being able to support a top-notch offense?
And I think you hit the nail on the head there. In Tampa Bay, the tackles were great. The interior line was okay. They drafted center Mason Graham. He was good enough. But realistically, a power run game, they did well as a line. So that was a big strength. And Coen was able to lean on that. And he did play 32% with an extra tight end on the field. So he was like middle of the pack. So he was willing to put an extra body out there to block. So it worked out really well. The key to that offense was also those tackles protecting Baker Mayfield. Mayfield was frequently comfortable, and he was good at stepping up in the pocket. So he was able to make plays. So basically, Liam Coen always had the full playbook at his disposal because everything was situationally right for him. And it was a perfect storm. He had the perfect components. Now, Jacksonville will be interesting. As you mentioned, the offensive line, nowhere close to what we saw in Tampa Bay last year. And look, say Baker Mayfield is a bad quarterback, and I can't fight you on that one. But his second year was when Freddie Kitchens tanked out as a coach. His fourth year is when he tore up both shoulders and played. And then the year after that, it was that weird year between Carolina and the Rams. But if you take his other 4 seasons, Baker Mayfield has actually been a slightly above average NFL quarterback. He's not been a train wreck. He's had 4 good years. Now, last year was a career year, of course. And so now Trevor Lawrence, well, he doesn't have a 25 touchdown season on his resume. And I know the coaching there has been bad, but at some point, if you're an elite quarterback, you probably got to have one of those seasons. And he doesn't have it. He has a half a good season to his resume. Now, Coen excites me because he will figure out how to weaponize his players. He didn't, unlike Sean McVay, he didn't make Mike Evans block. Well, go back with McVay. He didn't make Odell Beckham block. So, but it was smart. He used the players for what they did best. Godwin still blocked. So he understands it. So Coen will get the absolute most out of this group. The running back room is a little bit iffy. They got a lot of bodies, but I don't know they have anybody. One last thing I'll say. Coen is going to have a real job to get the most out of Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas was a wide receiver 1-ish type, and we're drafting him really high. Do you know that all of his big games pretty much came with Mac Jones? It was a 6-game stretch. Those games with Trevor Lawrence, I want to say in 11 games, he was under 6 PPR points 3 times. He only was over 15 PPR points twice. Brian Thomas Jr. did very little with Trevor Lawrence. Liam Coen, that is job number 1. And can he fix it? I hope, because Trevor Lawrence needs to get the most out of that young man.
When it comes to BTJ, I'll take a glass half full argument and say that we saw him finish as a top 5 scorer at the wide receiver position in a bottom 8 scoring offense. If Liam Coen could come in there and make this a middle, and again, low bar, I'm saying if he can make them a very middle of the pack offense, BTJ could actually have an explosive season. Talent, I don't think we're questioning. Athleticism, certainly not. When it comes to BTJ, he's checking off a ton of boxes for a guy that could take that next big step. So I will have bags packed of BTJ this year. My rankings come out at FantasyPoints sometime maybe this week or next. I did a top 50, which becomes a top 100. BTJ is very high up there. And what I think is interesting is the Travis Hunter selection. It gives you the ability to bump BTJ inside, which Liam Coen has talked about, moving him around a little bit more in the offense. If we could see BTJ like 30% of the time in the slot, maybe even 35% of the time in the slot, you're going to get him a few more easy button looks, a chance to use his yak ability. I mean, that really excites me.
The question we do need to ask is, why was Mac Jones a perfect fit for Brian Thomas Jr.? And my answer is this: it was aggression. Mac Jones had nothing to lose. He just got aggressive. He just started throwing it downfield, pounding targets. The targets were through the roof. Mac Jones may not be a good quarterback, but Mac Jones understood the only way I'm going to have success is pounding this young man with targets. And again, coaching or no coaching, Trevor Lawrence, I hope he is not set in his ways. I hope he is coachable. I hope he's able to do this, because I'd love to see Brian Thomas Jr. have a season. But that is my apprehension, because he had a long time with Trevor Lawrence, and it didn't get better in those last few games. It never got better. And so I'm just very concerned with that. Again, we're very hopeful. And I trust Liam Coen. I believe if somebody can do it, it's Coen. But we have to really answer that question. Is Trevor Lawrence a good quarterback?
And that's the question. And I think Trevor Lawrence is one where if things go south this year, Jacksonville is going to embrace one of these quarterbacks in the 2026 class, because you have a 22-year-old wide receiver playing next to a 21-year-old wide receiver. They have no first-round pick next year, so it's going to take a little finagling and getting around. But when we talk about the 2026 class, there's like 6 guys who can go in the first round. Jacksonville trying to get inside the back half. Like, there'll be competition for T-Law. On the flip side, if T-Law can get things together, then that Travis Hunter trade is going to look really, really smart, because you're going to have 2 of the most dynamic wide receivers attached to a quarterback who sort of gets everything right. And it's year 5 for him, Jim. This is a guy who's been in the league long enough. Year 5, a lot of pressure being put on Trevor Lawrence. But Liam Coen, we really believe in him. This is an offense that we have circled as one we really need to watch this year. Jim, let everybody know what you're doing this time of year, where they can find your work.
Like all of us, busy. There are threads and stats of the day on the X every day at Jim Coventry NFL, Twitter live shows on the RotoWire account of that, and everything you find it through at Jim Coventry NFL on the X. That's where you get all the work. And then at RotoWire, we're giving off 15% off discount on any subscription. You use Roto15 at checkout when you go to rotowire.com. And that's where you can find all my work there. But again, get it through the X.
Yeah, I'm going to be on RotoWire Pod end of the month on Alan Seslowski's Dynasty Pod. Big shout out to Jim Coventry and Alan Seslowski. You'll see them throughout the season here on my pods at Fantasy Points, because I love these guys. These guys are ball knowers, and they always bring the heat when they're on my podcast. Let's keep it going. Klint Kubiak, you mentioned the use of the fullback. One of the low-key draft picks this offseason was Seattle drafting Robbie Ouzts in the 5th round. And people are like, who's that? And Theo, you probably mispronounced his last name, but you're talking about a 6'4", 275-pound fullback, and Seattle's going to embrace him. And when we talk about these guys like Kyle Juszczyk, guys like Alec Ingold, it's interesting. I certainly, these are names that don't put up fantasy points, but these are names that obviously help other players score points. When you have a fullback on the field, this is a player that they're not designing plays for. And this is a player that's freeing up another running back as a blocker. And when you're talking about blocking, pass blocking, these are also guys who can add some there. So like last year, when we talk about Klint Kubiak, we're talking about a guy who started off red hot. When the Saints were fully healthy, they scored 45 and 44 points back-to-back weeks. Everybody's like, this guy, Klint Kubiak, is going to be a head coach next season. Then guys started getting injured. Derek Carr fell back to regression, and things went south. But when you look at the Saints, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed combined for like 14 games played, like 15 games played. So they were missing horses last year. But Kubiak was certainly a guy who got a lot out of Alvin Kamara. He averaged 19 points per game last year. I'm very bullish on this situation. There's enough in Seattle right now with 2 running backs who have shown they can score in fantasy, Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet. Jaxon Smith-Njigba had 100 catches last year. They add Cooper Kupp, sort of an interesting pickup. See how much they can get out of him at his age and can his health hold up. But this Seattle offense seems like it could be an underrated one for fantasy.
Klint Kubiak's interesting. Why did he have those big games to start the season with the Saints? Well, here's what they did. First of all, they were number 1 in the league in heavy personnel. 2/3 of the snaps, a little less than that, they had an extra heavy player, whether it's a tight end or a fullback on the field. And then what they were doing with Derek Carr, remember, if Derek Carr is under pressure, Derek Carr is terrible. Well, what they did was they used boot action and play action behind that extra blocker that they had, and it worked out well. And remember, Rashid Shaheed is outstanding as a deep receiver, and he made some big plays early. And Derek Carr, say many things about him, but if he is protected, he can get the ball downfield. So it was a perfect storm. Now, here's what Klint Kubiak has to deal with. First of all, you're going from Derek Carr to Sam Darnold. And you might think, okay, well, what's the difference? But remember, this is a perfect offense for Derek Carr. Sam Darnold has a mobility to do boot action and play action, but I don't see him as a deep passer. Derek Carr is actually a good deep passer. So we're going to have to see how that shakes out. But who's he throwing to deep? That's the next problem. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Cooper Kupp are your top two receivers. They're both really intermediate receivers at most. Marquez Valdes-Scantling's on the roster. We know he had a few big plays for the Saints last year when he moved into that role, but can you really count on him? And so it's a question of what we're going to get from Seattle out here now. So like you said with Seattle, they have good running backs, but the offensive line's not very good, but it wasn't good in New Orleans. I think Kubiak is going to give Darnold a chance to at least have some easy connections, but I don't think the downfield and magic in New Orleans will be there because of personnel. I do think that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is a huge beneficiary because with his quarterback getting some time with the protections, I think those targets go in the 150 range. What were they in the 110s or something like that last year? I think we're going to go 150 targets.
150 targets for JSN would certainly be a huge leap forward. He also escapes, like 2 seasons ago, it's Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf for completely boxing him out his rookie season.
Yep.
Last year, he sort of overcame everything, had 100 receptions. And this year, it's both those guys are gone. JSN is the man. So it's the full maturation of JSN. I agree. And I think the additional blockers, and Jim, what's interesting with JSN, like, would we want to play him outside a lot? Maybe not. But I think that when we're talking about him reaching a fantasy ceiling, being able to play outside and getting out of the slot is something that he has to embrace. Let's see do you have it in you to give us a top 3 scoring season at the wide receiver spot? That sort of thing would have been very difficult to come by unless he was going to put up like peak Michael Thomas numbers for him to do with last year's usage. So I think Seattle getting Kupp can't play outside at this age. I think that's wishful thinking.
Well, to block he does.
To block he does.
He'll play outside to block.
But in terms of his usage as a receiver,
right,
you got to think that the majority of his production is going to come from inside the slot, those easy button type reads. Whereas JSN can win both ways. So for me, like, Kubiak has shown the ability to be aggressive. He's shown the ability to be innovative. He has 2 running backs who are good. Seattle's made efforts to improve their offensive line. Love the Gray Zabel pick in the NFL draft.
Right.
I'm optimistic about this team. Can Sam Darnold support it? Darnold was in a better offensive ecosystem last year in Minnesota, but can Kubiak sort of scheme him up? I'll tell you one thing. I'll take 2025 Sam Darnold over 2024 Derek Carr all day and twice on Sundays, Jim.
Again, with the system, if it's going back to wanting the deep passing, I don't think Darnold has it in his arsenal. But that's neither here nor there. But you're right. In terms of an effective quarterback for 16 weeks, yeah, I would prefer, in this case, Darnold over Carr. Do not disagree with you. One last thing I'll say. The running game started out hot. Kamara was leading the league through 4 weeks. He was like blowing away all the running backs. And then Philadelphia said, oh, we see what you're doing. Philadelphia put a 5th defensive lineman on the field, and that was the blueprint to stop the rushing attack. Once that happened, the rushing attack never caught wind again because it was more of a wide zone run. And what happened was they had no ability to push runs inside. And so we'll see what happens in this new landing spot for Klint Kubiak, but we'll see if he can refine his running game. And because the blueprint is out on how to stop what they did in New Orleans, we have to see if it translates here.
I remember that week 3 game. It was sort of like the one that we thought was going to be a shootout. It was like a 15-12 game. Saquon Barkley had the walk-off touchdown. Exciting game, though, Jim. Definitely getting me excited for football by mentioning that one. Let's talk about the Dan Campbell coaching tree. We're starting to see it. Not only are we seeing, obviously Aaron Glenn is the head coach, but Tanner Engstrand is now the offensive coordinator. Let's talk about Tanner Engstrand. I had Sigmund Bloom on the pod. He's very excited about Tanner Engstrand just because of the aggressiveness that he could bring. It seems like an inspired hire. A lot. You talk about guys with experience. Certainly New York could have had a more experienced offensive coordinator. Instead, they go with Engstrand, who again coached under Ben Johnson, coached under Dan Campbell in Detroit. They add Justin Fields at quarterback, which adds another another layer where we haven't seen this sort of rushing threat in the Dan Campbell era. that we're going to see with Fields. So there's another layer, another element to the team's offense. But Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and then a whole lot of nothing in terms of the skill positions. But they did draft Armand Membu on the offensive line.
The offensive line is quite good. They invested last year. They had some injuries, but the line was way, way upgraded from 2 years ago when it was horrific. If it wasn't for the Giants in 2023 having that worst line like ever, the Jets would have been in the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right. That line is good now. It's an above average line. Engstrand is going to have to make it on his own because he can take literally nothing from Ben Johnson to this offense because Jared Goff is a real specific quarterback that has to be managed a real specific way. Well, he's not Jared Goff. And second thing is the dominant running game that the Lions had where they would maul you over and over and over. They have, again, good players here, but they don't have the DNA in the offensive line to match what the Lions had. That Lions line was top 3. This is maybe a top 15 line. So Engstrand's going to have to come in here, and he doesn't have Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's Garrett Wilson, a completely different player. So I don't see anything that can come from Ben Johnson, what he did in Detroit. It doesn't translate here. What if Tanner Engstrand is going to be successful? Here's what he has to do. And we don't know if he will. You have to base your offense out of an RPO set. Justin Fields cannot read the entire football field. Everybody knows that. He can read half of the field. So you have to fix it for him pre-snap. You have to either roll him out or you have to design quick plays, but you have to use RPO to keep the linebackers on their heels. It's a very specific way, and Justin Fields could be a fantasy Superman in that system. I expect that Engstrand will figure that out quickly, and that'll be important. But understand this. None of Ben Johnson's concepts will work in New York.
Yeah, I agree with you to an extent. I think one thing that we'll see from New York is what we saw with Ben Johnson. The one constant we'll see with Engstrand is they're going to chase big plays. And when you talk about the RPO play action has been sort of a cheat code for a number of offenses this year. I think when you add in the rushing element of Justin Fields and make it an RPO type offense, now we're talking, because that's going to open some plays up downfield. What I'm interested in, could we see some big play opportunities for Breece Hall, who's been sort of a battered asset this offseason in Dynasty and really in redraft? If you're drafting on Underdog now, like I am, you occasionally see some 4th round Breece Hall, which would have been like sacrilege a year ago. But this is a guy that's never had 1,000 rushing yards. He has never averaged fewer than 15 points per game. Breece Hall has been, last year we saw the explosive element take a step back from what we saw in year 1 and year 2. Huge year for him. And you have Aaron Glenn with the coach speak saying he wants it to be a 3-headed backfield, wants Braylon Allen, wants Isaiah Davis to get touches. But at the end of the day, Jim, when push comes to shove, Breece Hall is just more talented than those guys if he's fully healthy.
As you're saying, Breece Hall has to play markedly better than he did in 2024. None of us could quantify Breece Hall's season last year unless you could say it was the poison of Aaron Rodgers. Other than that, he was healthy. That's something he couldn't say about his first 2 years. And it was his worst season. And so where did it come from? There is no quantifiable way. You mentioned all his yards after contact, his broken tackle rate. They went down. They were bad, below average. This is not the running back we thought. We thought this was Superman. And we ended up seeing, what happened here? So if it wasn't Aaron Rodgers poisoning the team and basically people checking out, I don't have an answer for what happened to Breece Hall. If it was just him, then that's a problem. Because if that's the running back we're getting this year, then it's going to be a 3-headed backfield. I want to believe that Breece Hall is coming back. I want to make up a story that makes it sound like it wasn't his fault. But man, he had a lot of opportunities. Again, the fantasy points per game are good because he can catch the ball. That certainly helps. But I can't rationalize in my mind what happened to him last year, Theo.
Yeah, it's a super weird one, and it's a very polarizing player right now. I think you're going to find people that view him as a massive value at ADP. I think you're also going to find some people that are like fully fading him this year. This could be the year the wheels fall off. I think I'm in the, if he's available in the 4th round, I'm going to take some chances, especially in a big tournament. But when push comes to shoves, if we're talking about like FFPC main events, we're talking about NFFC prime times, big money drafts end of the summer, I don't know if he's a guy that I fully want to embrace this year. I do think that the offseason is going to be telling, Jim, this is a team that has a lot of coverage from the beat reporters. Let's see sort of the way things are shaking out. Are they going to fully embrace the three-headed backfield? I think when it comes to Garrett Wilson, it comes to Justin Fields, I can paint myself a storyline that Wilson's been one of the biggest target earners in the NFL over the last 3 years, and there's no target competition for him whatsoever. And this is a quarterback in Justin Fields that I think will hyper-target Garrett Wilson. So I think he's an okay value where he's being drafted. Fields obviously is a guy that is one of the better per game running quarterbacks we've ever seen. I believe he's top 3 in NFL history in rushing yards per game at the quarterback spot. Those two guys are interesting. I think I'm avoiding other Jets at this point. Definitely an interesting team for us to follow. Go ahead, Jim.
Real quick. Now, remember, Justin Fields with DJ Moore 2 years ago, 1,300, I believe, 66 yards.
Wide
it was
receiver
a
6
massive
overall.
Season.
Wide receiver 6.
Yes, and don't think for a minute this won't be the same, but here's the second one I want to point out. Look, I know Mason Taylor was a second-round pick in the draft, and I know he's going as tight end 26 in many drafts. Cole Kmet had a career year with Justin Fields in 2023, like 719 yards, 6 touchdowns, 90 targets. There is no second receiver, like you said earlier. Mason Taylor, if you're in your super flex, and I mean in your best ball league, I should say, you want to target him as your third tight end because he's a pure pass catcher. He's going to see time, and Justin Fields can find that tight end.
Very interesting call with Mason Taylor. He's certainly a guy who's in an unbelievable situation in year one, in that like there's like this big group of rookie tight ends that all have intriguing attributes, but Mason Taylor is by far the one that has the best chance to be the number 2 leading receiver on his football team. Very interesting player. John Morton is one where he was under Dan Campbell 2 seasons ago. We could have thrown him into the discussion with the Josh Grizzard, Kevin Patullo, guys that we think are sort of trying to emulate what you had in last year's offensive coordinator. We'll talk about those guys a little later. But Morton was in Denver for the last 2 years as the passing game coordinator, comes back to Detroit, massive shoes to fill, trying to replace Ben Johnson, who's been one of the better offensive coordinators we've seen over the last like 20 years. We're going to talk about Ben Johnson in a minute. But what's interesting when it comes to Morton was the 2-back approach, utilizing 2 running backs, specific to a Ben Johnson, a Dan Campbell, or a little bit of both? Could we see Morton shift a little bit more towards utilizing Jahmyr Gibbs more like a 1 and Montgomery more like a 2 than a clear 1A, 1B split? And my other question to you would be, is there a potential winner from Sam Laporta or Jameson Williams here, where these two guys are sort of, one of the two of them I think is really going to help fantasy managers, but we want to target the one that we think is going to be the number 2 leading target earner on the team and not the number 3 target earner. So it's really a two-headed question here, Jim. Unpack it as much as you want.
So first thing I want to say is this. The Detroit Lions told us through week 7 last year who they wanted to be on offense. This is a team with an emerging defense. It was a top 10 type defense. And then they slowly lost everybody. But through the first 7 weeks, what did we learn? Weeks 3 through 7 specifically, Jared Goff was throwing 25 or fewer passes. Sam Laporta through week 7 averaged 2.8 targets. Weeks 3 through 7, Jameson Williams, it was about 2 targets per game. This team, that's their identity. Their defensive players are coming back this year. They're healthy. Those rookies they drafted a corner last year, they're in their second year. This team is going to be a top 8 defense. They are going to use that offensive line. They are going to run. Jared Goff, aside from the occasional shootout, is not throwing more than 25 passes in a game. That they taught us last year. David Montgomery, I have to believe, even though we think the cat's out of the bag, Jahmyr Gibbs was an amazing megastar when he got the role to himself. This team paid David Montgomery. He's a heart and soul type player for this team. They're both playing. They're playing regularly. I think they don't want to get Gibbs hurt. They had 18 defensive injuries last year. They can't go down that rabbit hole of losing people if they could keep people healthy. So I think this team is going to run. Both running backs are going to be great. Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to have his great floor season of 1,200 yards, which is an amazing floor. But outside of that, I don't think there's targets for Laporta. I don't think there's targets for Jameson Williams. Not that we could count on in fantasy lineups each week, and we saw that last year.
I think there's a chance they're both sub 100 targets. That's a difficult thing to bet on for those two. With Jameson Williams, though, I get a discount where Laporta, I have to draft him as the tight end 3 overall. Jameson Williams, I'm able to get lower than his finish last year. So Williams has been a guy that I've been steaming up a little bit. And we have had this positive coach speak from Morton and from Dan Campbell about how this is a breakout season for Williams, which I think is interesting, Jim, because last year he was what we would view as a breakout season for him in year 3. They seem to think there's a little bit more room to run. Targets are interesting when it comes to Williams, but could we see more manufactured touches in addition to like 90 targets? Maybe we see more rushing opportunities for him, a wrinkle there. Definitely an interesting one for Detroit. So you are in on Gibbs at ADP and Montgomery at ADP. Amon-Ra seems like he's correctly priced, and then a little bit apprehensive about Williams and Laporta. I think I'll take a bullish Jameson Williams stance just based on I think he's affordable, and I think there's room to run there. All right, so the one we've got to talk about, and this is going to be a storyline all season long, Ben Johnson stayed in Detroit an extra year, could have been a head coach somewhere last year. Instead stays, had Chicago as a team that he circled apparently as a team he was very intrigued by, and of course takes the Chicago Bears job. They then draft Luther Burden in the second round after drafting Colston Loveland in the first round, made a bunch of moves on the offensive line. Same thing we saw with Bryce Young a year before. With Caleb Williams, they improved their interior offensive line. They're going to have an improved offensive line in Chicago. This is a fun one. Chicago has a lot to work with. Ben Johnson's a guy we're really, really betting on. How bullish are you on this offense taking a significant step forward for Ben Johnson in year 1? Or is there going to be a little bit of growing pains when it comes to this is a 2026 bet? And let's remind everybody, Ben Johnson is taking over a team that averaged 18.2 points per game last year, which was bottom 5 in the NFL.
So the Chicago offense was beyond broken last year. The interior offensive line, although not talented, they were not coached to pick up what we call a simulated pressure. When teams would send an undiagnosed defender, he was always in the Chicago backfield at the snap of the ball. They had no concept how to pick that up. That was the main cause of the doom of Caleb Williams' season. He was constantly on the run. Second problem, the offensive play design. What was their answer? Bubble screens to DJ Moore. Well, the defense already had 8 people up, so there was no room for him to run. And even though he had an 85th percentile yards after catch, there was no room to run. So Caleb Williams never had a chance. I give him a complete clean slate this year because none of that is something he could have overcome. Ben Johnson, the only question we might have, will it take him time to learn how to optimize Caleb Williams? Remember, he optimized Jared Goff. It's possible there's a learning curve, but I think Williams is talented enough where that's not an issue. I think Ben Johnson has been given all the ingredients to come out with an outstanding offense. Look, how high were we on Rome Odunze last year? And then because of the offense, well, guess what? It didn't work out. Not his fault. The Bears have 2 elite receivers. We love Colston Loveland, who could be weaponized and moved all over the formation. The offensive line's good. The running game, hey, right now, DeAndre Swift, they'll get 3 yards in a cloud of dust. They might get J.K. Dobbins. They might get Nick Chubb in free agency. But right now, I think that passing game is going to cook, Theo. I think that with the protection, Williams can extend plays when he needs to. And I think the receivers are certainly going to be used way more weaponized than they were last year. I am very excited about the Bears passing attack, and I like your call. It could be a 2026 bet, but right now, the defense isn't going to be great. They're going to have to score, and I think they have the pieces in place to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I want access to this offense. It's interesting where there's 3 pass-catching wide receivers. I think it's okay to sprinkle exposure to all of them. Luther Burden is the cheapest one, but if he can earn that slot role, he's a very interesting bet to make. Certainly, Rome Odunze could be a post-type sleeper. And DJ Moore, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 14, him giving you top 15 wide receiver numbers this year, even though, I don't think Ben Johnson fully loves DJ Moore. He threw him under the bus a little bit, called him out as our wide receivers need to block. I think that was a DJ Moore call out. He's still in a good spot. And Caleb Williams, they've added so many pieces around him that even if they want to embrace sort of a low A dot, really embrace his accuracy on short throws. They have the personnel to do that. So I think I'm bullish on this offense. The one thing that's super interesting to me, and curious your thoughts, you mentioned that this is a team that might air it out. This is another question of mine. I'll try to unpack, this is one thing that I think with Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson, the last 2 years have been so fruitful that they're difficult to kind of separate from one another. Last year, Detroit was actually only passing on 53% of plays, which was very, very low for the NFL. In 2023, they were passing on 56% of them. So like you said, they went even more run happy in 2024. Is that a Ben Johnson thing or a Dan Campbell thing? I think it might be a little, I think it's a little bit more of a Dan Campbell thing. And I think you could see Detroit being somewhere smack dab in the middle of the NFL in terms of pass attempts rather than towards the bottom 10 teams.
Theo, I think it's a Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery thing and an offensive line thing.
And that makes a lot of sense. It's embracing your personnel. And what do smart play callers do, Jim? They don't try to pigeonhole their scheme. They try to find the best way to utilize their players. That's been proven time and time again. So that's an absolute bar. We're going to have to quote that one on you. But it's a Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, and having the best offensive line in the NFL sort of thing. So with Chicago, if you cared to bet on the percentage of passing plays, and this is a difficult one, and for anybody scoring at home, last year the Cleveland Browns were the most pass happy in the NFL. They had 65% of the plays were pass attempts, whereas the bottom was Philadelphia because of Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts. They were only attempting a pass on 43% of their plays. So Detroit was at 53%, which was 25th. So towards the bottom of the NFL. Where would you care to bet Chicago finishes?
Yeah, about 56%. They're not going to be able to run nearly as much as the Lions unless, again, they significantly add in free agency. Again, I said earlier, there are two good potential free agent running backs out there, but they can't be run heavy with DeAndre Swift. That would be a poor use of the talent they have on their roster. So I'd say about 56%, definitely top half of the league for sure. One thing I want to point out, I am out on Luther Burden last year because I do believe Ben Johnson should continue to be among the top 6 teams and using heavy personnel. What that means is they only have a third receiver on the field 55% of the time. Other teams will have their third receiver out there upwards of 65, 70% of the time. Burden's the clear number 3 in this one. And if he's going to be in a snap squeeze, and the other thing is, I believe that both DJ Moore and Rome Odunze can be elite NFL receivers who are going to command targets. I think between the loss of snaps and Burden having to defer as the third option, I think that even at wide receiver 48 or wherever he's going, I think that's still overpriced.
Yeah, he's an interesting one, and we'll just sort of butt heads on this one. To be continued. Luther Burden, I think, is just worth the shot because you say wide receiver 48 is a little bit high for you, but for me, it's if things shift towards him in the usage, he can end up being a big payoff type. And what's interesting is the slot wide receiver role has been such a really a fantasy football ATM machine when it's associated with a Ben Johnson. And I know, Jim, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you or I could be his offensive coordinator and the guy would produce numbers. But Ben Johnson was also in Miami when Jarvis Landry led the NFL in receptions. And Luther Burden is a guy he's called a stud, a guy that he really seems to be excited about. So Luther Burden is definitely one where there's risk and reward with drafting him his current price tag, but I will absolutely take some shots. Let's talk about Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore takes over a difficult situation in New Orleans. What are your vibes here? And is there a chance that we could see ADP wins coming from it? It's pretty much every year, Jim. We could do a whole show about this. Battered offenses can oftentimes produce ADP wins because the marketplace will push multiple players down. Specifically with New Orleans, Alvin Kamara last year averaged 19 points per game. Certainly it's going to be a tougher putt with Tyler Shuckett behind center or maybe even Spencer Rattler. But Kellen Moore has been a guy that we would say is a plus play caller over the years. But what's more interesting to me is Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, a lack of target competition. Both of these guys are sort of free square plays for you. You're not having to use excessive draft capital on Olave like you were for the previous 2 years. And Shaheed is completely buried right now. Your thoughts on trying to extract ADP value for New Orleans, even though we think this is going to be an offense that might have trouble scoring at times.
Yeah, it's a bad situation, like you said, because of the quarterback. Really, Tyler Shuck, man, good luck. I mean, I'm not excited. I mean, I think he has a lot of talent and skill, but I mean, he's a 26-year-old quarterback, last year, 25-year-old, and playing a man against boys, and he figured things out. So there's that. But I really am. I feel bad for Kellen Moore. He's in a bad spot because Chris Olave, I think, is the winner here. And Derek Carr, look, he would throw what I call medicine balls. Both of the concussions that Olave suffered were because Derek Carr led him into a defender and let him get rocked. And that's like Jimmy Garoppolo stuff, getting George Kittle hurt back in the day. At least I hope Tyler Shuck can make professional throws that don't get his receiver hurt, because Chris Olave should not have had either of those concussions. So that said, we can't predict concussions, or can we fade them? I think Olave, whenever he gets 6 targets a game, Theo, it's only been a couple games in his career that he hasn't had 80 yards in those games with 6 or more targets. He is an amazing NFL receiver, and I believe Shuck, and that's who I expect to be the starter. I believe he will lean heavily on Olave, and Olave going around, what was it, wide receiver 30-ish?
Yeah.
Steal all day long. Look, if you're worried about the concussions, fade him. I'm not going to take that chance. I'm going after him aggressively. Shaheed coming back from a very serious knee injury. I don't know what to make of that. And I don't know how Shuck will do on the downfield passes, assuming Shaheed even gets back. That worries me. Shaheed was a certain type of player, and if he loses anything from that injury this year, it would be a real problem.
Yeah, and when we look at Kellen Moore offenses, it's been wide receiver cheat code ADP numbers. Keenan Allen under Kellen Moore was fantastic 2 seasons ago in LA. And obviously CeeDee Lamb ascension in Dallas. Last year they weren't passing a lot, but AJ Brown was still very, very, very productive on a per game basis. Still averaged 16.5 points per game. So pretty much every single season with Kellen Moore, we've seen wide receivers either hit their number or exceed their ADP number. I think Olave is a really good bet right now. And what's interesting, Jim, is the team extended Olave. We don't have any contract situation hanging over his head. They've embraced him. This was a guy that they could have moved. And New Orleans could have, they're a weird team because the season seems to be completely falling out from under them. But at least internally, I think the vibes are a little bit better than we might think. They have at least some strong offensive linemen there. They've drafted players on that O-line in consecutive drafts. Kelvin Banks this year, this is the second year in a row they've drafted an offensive tackle inside of the top 12 picks. So there's some talent on that O-line. If we can get a Tyler Shuck hyper targeting Chris Olave, as you think he will, he could definitely provide some big ADP wins. On the flip side here, New Orleans is an offense that drafters are pretty much ignoring, but Vegas is an offense that drafters are embracing. And that's because Ashton Jeanty is going off the board as the RB4 overall. And that's on top of Brock Bowers being drafted as the tight end 1 overall. So when you're talking about underdog, you're talking about 2 players who were steamed up. If you're talking about FFPC, you're talking about 2 of the top 8 picks coming from the Vegas Raiders. I mean, this is something we haven't seen in the last few years where drafters excessively targeting Vegas Raiders. Certainly Devontae Adams had his moments there. But let's unpack this. Chip Kelly, this was a guy that years ago was sort of for a brief period of time, this guy was like a Ben Johnson. This guy was innovative. He was running the fastest pace offense in football. This is a guy that had Michael Vick in Philadelphia. They were putting up video game-like numbers. Then it came all crashing down towards the end of Chip Kelly in the NFL, sort of reinvented himself in college, goes to UCLA, has some success there, but really it was last year at Ohio State where led the Buckeyes to the national championship, was fantastic as a signal caller. And Jim, sort of a rule in football, if your entire fan base is brokenhearted that you're leaving, it's usually a good sign that you know what you're doing. And Buckeyes fans to a T were devastated to lose Chip Kelly. Your thoughts on how he can do in Vegas, attached to Pete Carroll? There's some real talent on this Vegas offense. Geno Smith, they acquire as a quarterback. Big changes here, but I'd say a functional offensive line. Brock Bowers is fantastic. Now you add in Smith, Jeanty, Jack Betch to complement Jacoby Myers. There's some players here in Vegas.
they lack a vertical element to the offense.
Okay.
And that is always problematic because what do defenses do when you don't have a vertical element? Well, they could pack more bodies in the short and intermediate area and make you sweat a little bit. Now, that said, they do have skill position players who should be able to thrive. I think Jakobi Meyers is a screaming value. He's going to get plenty of targets here. Brock Bowers, I'd rather have Trey McBride. You look at their numbers last year, they were the same.
Exactly
McBride missed the game.
Yeah.
He missed one game. They were the same. The touchdowns were 2 and 6 or 2 and 5. Touchdowns are fickle. I can't predict those year to year. They were the same player. I can get McBride around later. So give me the 1 round value on McBride, but you're fine if you go with Bowers. It's fine if you go with them, but just if you get the same guy around later, that's like an all day long thing for me, but he'll be just fine. So yeah. And I think all that said, all these guys are going to catch a lot of passes. And for fantasy, I think it's going to be great for the two, for Meyers. Besh, we'll see how Besh goes in. I don't know how different Besh is than Meyers and that they're both going to work short and intermediate. And I think Jakobi Meyers is maybe much more apt to drawing the confidence of Geno Smith because he is an uber professional route runner and he is always where he's supposed to be. So I think he is going to command a lot of those targets, and Besh might take a little longer because that redundancy to see that. But of course, you love Jeanty in the 3-down role. Chip Kelly, look, fortunately, this is going to be a very basic offense, which will work because same knock I have on him his first time around. Yeah, he caught the league off guard with the fast tempo play. But once the league made an adjustment to him, like I said, with all these college coaches, they have no answer. Remember, Chip Kelly resurfaced in San Francisco. Same thing. Had no answers. So he goes to college and he's great. Beautiful. Your players are better than their players. Your scheme is better than theirs. You can go golf all week in college if you have a team that wins. And it's going to, you just roll it back every week and you win. Well, in the NFL, first half of the first game, there's adjustments made. Chip Kelly has never proven he can make an adjustment of this magnitude. So again, these fantasy guys, I think they're the ones I mentioned are fine, but it's not going to be because of Chip Kelly. It's going to be because they have some real professional players on that offense.
And your expectation for Ashton Jeanty, specifically to the sort of volume he could see, is this a player who in year one could end up potentially leading the NFL in touches from the running back position? And I'll say 21 years old has been absolute gold when we're talking about top 10 type picks. Saquon Barkley had his running back 1 overall season. Zeke Elliott gave you north of 20 points as a 21-year-old. Now you've got Jeanty. Are drafters correct to push him up this highly ahead of guys like Devon Achane, ahead of a number of wide receivers that we would put in the mix for chasing that wide receiver 1 overall finish? Where are you at on Jeanty at his inflated price tag?
I think Jeanty is priced perfectly. I don't think he has running back 1 overall upside because this offense is going to score a ton of points.
That's right.
You're going to be on offense like Barkley where they're scoring 28, 29 points a game, and even if Bijan Robinson's team, the Falcons, don't score that many, it's going to be, we've already seen the role he has in that offense. I think overall, Jeanty's going to have an enormous floor. Enormous. I don't think we're going to get the spike weeks we want because I think the Raiders are going to have a lot of weeks where they're scoring 19, 22 points. And I think that makes a difference. I think it's a little micro thing. I don't think you fade Jeanty. You don't fade him at all at that price. If you want your running back at running back 4, I think you go all over it and say, I've got a great floor play and I got great ceiling, but I don't need the running back 1. I just need the running back 4. And I think he gets you that.
I think what's interesting about Jeanty is if he's going to run up to running back 1 overall numbers, then he's going to exceed our expectations as a pass catcher. I think that him just being on the field, he's a good enough pass catcher that he's going to be an every down player. Mm-hmm. There's no number 3 back there that's going to siphon off so many targets. Like Jeanty can roll out of bed and catch 50 passes next year. It's can he get to like that 65 to 68 range just by the offense sort of falling into play where they're targeting him just a bit more than we're projecting. That's the pathway for him to catch Bijan, to catch Jahmyr Gibbs, and potentially catch Saquon Barkley. He is a home run hitter, though, Jim. Like, he'll also have those big, long runs as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Theo, one thing I want to say, I don't think Jeanty has that type of receiving ceiling because look at the receivers. Brock Bowers, short. Jakobi Meyers, short. Well, I'd rather throw the ball short to a wide receiver or tight end than short to a running back. You're going to have Bowers there. I think there's going to a lot of, and not all offenses, but in some, tight end and running back targets are a little redundant. They can be. And they're different plays, but they're basically short escape route plays. I'd rather escape route to Brock Bowers. So I think that's the problem we're going to have. I think Jeanty's capable of 70 catches, but I think that with the best receivers in the team being short field guys, then I don't think they need to throw it to Jeanty there. I think Geno Smith is going to prefer to have it 5 yards downfield, 7 yards downfield.
And let's talk about Geno. Geno is a guy that the market is sort of forgetting. We like players in the offense, but Geno's not a guy who anybody's really embracing. He's being drafted as quarterback 25, which is far lower than his finish any season in Seattle. Do you think there's a little bit of validity? And we can skip redraft here, because in redraft, I mean, is Geno going to give you a big enough number to make a difference? I don't think so. But certainly on like underdog, Geno to me is sort of a screaming value. And if you're in a Superflex Dynasty startup, I think he's a really strong value if you want to wait on quarterback, because again, we have contract insulation and there's good players around him in Vegas. Your thoughts on Geno? Is he just a game manager in this offense, or is he a guy that could finish with top 15 numbers yet again?
Geno has slowly eroded away since that 2022 career year. And he went from 30 touchdowns and 11 picks. And then in 2023, 30 touchdowns became 20. And then he had 9 picks. Last year, 20 touchdowns, 21 again, 15 picks. He's slowly turning into the ordinary quarterback we kind of seen. He's been in the league since 2013. But he has that one big year in 2022. And that was the only big year he's had. So other than that, he has 1 year with over 21 touchdowns. So this is not the magic antidote. For, like I said, Bowers for PPR, Jacoby Myers for PPR, beautiful. This team's not scoring a lot of points. This team is going to be bottom half of the league in points scored. Therefore, I'm not buying their quarterback.
Well, one coordinator we have not talked about is a head coach. Brian Schottenheimer was a shock hire last offseason. Not a guy that we predicted to be the Dallas Cowboys' next head coach, but here we are, Jim. This is an interesting team. Didn't do a whole lot at the running back position this offseason. CeeDee Lamb is now joined by George Pickens in the pass game. Dak Prescott is back this year. This team, I think, is going to be pass happy. What are your vibes with the Dallas Cowboys offense? Is this an underrated offense? And could we see a return of CeeDee Lamb towards wide receiver 1 overall finish? And is George Pickens going to have himself a year as the wide receiver 2?
Yeah, Brian Schottenheimer will get credit for this offense being great, but he'll have nothing to do with it. It'll be the offensive players they have, and it's going to be great for fantasy, I think. The offensive line's not great, and I do think Schottenheimer, we don't know what his personnel tendencies are because it's been a long time since he's really been behind an offense. So that said, I believe they're going to run an extra tight end on the field. They have the personnel on the roster to do that. They're going to give Dak a little extra protection. The running backs, I'm not sold on any of them. Jaden Blue might be nice, but this is not going to be a sustaining running game. But that's good for fantasy because Dak Prescott, remember this, Theo, in the last 3 even-numbered years, 2024, 22, and 20, Dak Prescott was quarterback 2, quarterback 3, and quarterback 7. He's been there. He's done that. And he's going to be there and do that again this year. And I'm very excited about it. I think it was the odd number of years. I think I misspoke. That was 21, 23, and 19. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But yes, George Pickens opens up the offense. That's huge because CeeDee Lamb should have more room underneath because Pickens will occupy a safety. Pickens will get his. Lamb will get his. Jake Ferguson, not the ideal number 2 target that he was before, but we know Dak Prescott has a long history of leaning on his tight ends. And look, last year Ferguson had 3 games over 70 yards with Dak in 7 games. All 3 of those guys are guys you want to bet on in fantasy. Dak, you want to bet on in fantasy. The defense won't be as great as we'd like it to be. They're going to score points, and it's going to be the players, not the coach, getting it done.
Yeah, Dak's a screaming value, and his ADP is corrected. But before the Pickens trade, he was down at like quarterback 19. Now he's knocking on the door of quarterback 1 land, but you could still usually get him as a high-end QB2. CeeDee Lamb is amazing. We saw him have a 181 target season in 2023. And even last year with Cooper Rush as a starting quarterback, he was still giving you like 17.5 points per game. There's an outside chance, Jim. We haven't seen a 200 target player since when was the last 200 target season in the NFL? Like Julio Jones in 2015 was the last 200 target player. There's a chance you could see that from CeeDee Lamb if they fully embrace the pass. I think George Pickens is very interesting. There's a lot of pressure on Pickens this year to get himself that second contract. And George Pickens right now is it's a really, I think, solid value at ADP. He's going off the board right around wide receiver 29. He's going to be the secondary target. I think Ferguson is the number 3 target.
Yes.
You know that Dak's going to target the tight end in the red zone, but Pickens as a secondary target. What's interesting is you could make an argument that the number 2 target in the passing game is the number 2 option on offense. I think the running back's just going to be functional, and they're going to scheme up George Pickens to get him involved early, take some pressure off of Lamb, and they really complement each other very well, Pickens and Lamb. So I think I'm fully with you, Jim.
And the 200 target seasons, like you said, Julio Jones, 203 in 2015, Calvin Johnson in 2012, and Marvin Harrison in 2002, the only 3 on record. CeeDee Lamb could flirt with that, though.
We are due for one of those. We're absolutely due for one of those, and Lamb is as good a bet as any. Really, really crazy to think that number has held up so much, Jim. We've been really sort of chasing it. Justin Jefferson had 184. Michael Thomas had 185. Cooper Kupp in 2021 had 191. DeAndre Hopkins had 192 in 2015. It's just such a difficult number to overcome. Even with the 17th game, it just hasn't been emulated. So we're rooting for it. We love that sort of thing in fantasy football. Hey, Jim, how about 3 players get 200 targets this year? We would love that sort of thing. Let's talk about the 2 coordinators that we really don't need to spend a whole lot of time about. We're talking about Josh Grizzard, who it seems like they're chasing. In Tampa Bay, they have a very good thing working. They averaged 29 points per game last year. The year before, they had a strong offense as well. This has been a team that has been in the playoffs consecutive seasons under Baker Mayfield. This year, they go ahead and they re-sign Chris Godwin. They draft Emeka Egbuka. The show must go on in Tampa Bay. Josh Grizzard he can't screw this thing up, can he?
I don't think so, because Baker Mayfield, and you heard me mention this earlier in the show, I believe we have criminally underrated Baker Mayfield because of a couple of seasons that were beyond his control. Otherwise, he has been a good quarterback. And he has a line, he has receivers, he has a running back. Everything is in place. The defense is going to give up plenty of points. So, yeah, I don't think Grizzard could mess this up. I think basically his players will make sure it works, because Mayfield has a connection with Evans. He has a connection with Godwin. And so that said, I think it doesn't matter. I just don't think it matters at this point.
Yeah, Grizzard, we don't need to spend much time on. I think it's going to look a lot the same. The only thing that I think is going to be interesting is Chris Godwin, I think will have to play a little bit more on the outside to get Emeka Egbuka on the field, where Godwin last year, we saw this big step forward in his fantasy production, playing the slot predominantly. Does he go back to a little bit more 2023 usage? Do you have any sort of lean there, Jim, about where you think Godwin's going to get lined up? Because if you tell me Godwin's going to have the exact same slot usage as last year, I'll say, okay, I'm in on Godwin. If you tell me he's bumping out to the outside, I might be a little bit apprehensive to draft him in his current ADP.
It goes back to Jarvis Landry that Baker Mayfield has done really well with the slot receivers. And I believe, this is what my gut tells me. Look, this new coach is coming in, Josh Grizzard. I know he was with the team last year, but I think the veterans are going to speak on this. I think the veterans, when they were team meetings, I think Baker Mayfield's going to make it a point that Chris Godwin's in the slot when needed. I believe that they're going to push this because they know how good their offense is. You can't just move Godwin to let the new young man Egbuka walk into a spot. They'll put the young guys, McMillan and Egbuka, where Godwin isn't. I don't think they're going to mess with Godwin at all because they know Chris Godwin. They know he's a superstar player. He's had some bad injury luck. They can't put Chris Godwin at a disadvantage because it would hurt their entire team if they did that.
Yeah, that you're probably correct on that. And I think Bucky Irving is a fine value where he's going at ADP, early 3rd round pick right now in most formats. We saw last year Liam Coen embrace this, where Irving takes a big step forward. Rachaad White takes a step back. White is still a good pass catching back, but Jim, I think that if Irving can cut into that pass catching role even more, and they embrace him a little bit more, because have to remember, Bucky Irving led the nation in running back receptions while in college. Last year was very, very good as a receiver, very, very efficient, and adds that explosive dynamic element. He can end up beating his current ADP and providing some high-end numbers, giving you almost a 1-2 turn type scoring numbers. Your thoughts on Bucky?
First, I want to speak to Rachaad White, who you talked about in week 17, 18 in the wild card game. White was pretty much phased out. He averaged 20 snaps, which was fine. He averaged 2 rushes, 1 catch, and 16 yards. If that was the point where it was fully Bucky Irving's backfield. And I think in that one of those games, Irving had missed a few snaps. He had to come off the field. So White wasn't used that much. So as of right now, we have no reason to expect that Bucky Irving is not going to be a full-time 3-down back unless they decide to scale back for durability concerns. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think that, like you said, he is a great value where he's at. The only thing with Bucky Irving is the fear of the unknown. It was a perfect storm in Tampa's offense last year. Everything worked perfectly. We know Godwin and Evans are megastars. We know Baker Mayfield's very good. But if the whole perfect storm helped Bucky Irving get to where he's at and the perfect storm doesn't quite hit, remember, we were not regarding Bucky Irving as his world-changing running back coming out of college, and he had a world-breaking season last year. I'm just saying this. I think there's unrealized risk at his ADP. I'm not saying avoid him because of that. Just don't be surprised if, he's good, but he's human this year.
Yeah, definitely an interesting one to monitor. And another interesting one to monitor is the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. They lose Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore absolutely did what he showed up to do. He fixed the offense, won the Super Bowl. And now you see Kevin Patullo being promoted. This is a guy where 2 years ago, we probably wouldn't even known who the guy was. But he actually has a long-term history of being attached to Nick Sirianni. He's been in Philadelphia for a number of years now, was in Indianapolis beforehand, was the pass game specialist in Indianapolis, wide receivers coach in Indianapolis, comes over to Philly, passing game coordinator, and then last year was elevated to associate head coach and pass game coordinator. So this is a guy that obviously Nick Sirianni has a great deal of familiarity with. Anything to think that we're going to see anything different in Philly? Or is this sort of, hey, you know the script, let's do the exact same thing that won us the Super Bowl?
And I think that's the point you make when you in your last words. Kevin Patullo, in my mind, that's no serious NFL experience. He has all these jobs. I get it. No, he hasn't called plays. He hasn't really run an offense, but he does. Who cares? You got a great offensive line. You got Saquon Barkley. You've got Devontae Smith, and you've got A.J. Brown, and you got a quarterback. So there's not much to worry about here. You don't have to get too creative. Your players are better than the opponent's players, and you don't really have to put a whole lot into it. So I think this doesn't matter. I think the offense will be just fine, regardless of coach.
The one offensive coordinator that we didn't talk about, we completely forgot about, was Josh McDaniels, which is an interesting one because Mike Vrabel back in New England. Now you get Josh McDaniels also back in New England, had the most success of his career as the offensive coordinator in New England, has a bona fide potential star in Drake May. And Drake May obviously had to deal with awful offensive line play last year, but showed enough as a runner and as a passer to give you that sort of two-way ability where you squint and see fantasy football success. They add Stephon Diggs, add Kyle Williams, draft TreVeyon Henderson, and attempted to improve this offensive line. Drafted Will Campbell in round 1, Jared Wilson, the center out of Georgia, in round 3. Your thoughts on Josh McDaniel and what we could see out of this Patriots offense? Any potential players to target in fantasy for you, Jim?
I think it's a great coaching move for Drake May. If we've learned something about Josh McDaniels, we know he's going to use a lot of 2 tight end sets, give his quarterback protection, use some play action, try to scheme up some schemed throws. And I think this is going to help the progression of his young quarterback, Drake May. However, I am concerned with the receivers. We love Stephon Diggs, but he's coming off a mid-season ACL and he's in his 30s now. That's not a good recipe for being great. And then Diggs is ticketed for the slot. Well, Demario Douglas is a slot, so Demario Douglas is out of a job, but he's probably their second best receiver. Now we like Kyle Williams too. I think he's a player that would be better in year 2 than in year 1. I think he's a player that needs a little bit of development. He will be good. So I think for the Patriots, it's a building year, but it's a real positive for them. And Drake May is going to have a few good fantasy games. I just don't think we're going to be able to count on these players for big fantasy production week in, week out. I think you said with another team earlier, maybe there's more of a 2026 look.
Yeah, they're an interesting team. we really like the talent of Drake May. I know the Chris Wecht, who does our projections at Fantasy Points, has him significantly lower than his current ADP price tag at FFPC and Underdog price tag would demonstrate. TreVeyon Henderson's interesting to me just because, like you said, you have apprehension about the wide receivers there. I think if you just start looking at trying to find a dynamic playmaker in the offense, a guy who can utilize his yak ability as a receiver and also gives you much more of a home run hitting ability than a guy like Ramondre Stevenson does, TreVeyon Henderson, I think he's priced fine. I think he could end up giving us mid RB2 numbers, and you're able to get him sort of in that range. This is not an offense that I'm looking to fully embrace either, Jim. I think that there's better bets to be made, but TreVeyon Henderson would be the one that I like. Your quick thoughts on Henderson at ADP?
The only concern is Ramondre Stevenson's in year 2 of a deal that pays him starter money. He's 227 pounds, where TreVeyon Henderson is 202 pounds. If you're looking at this, they could start out camp saying, Stevenson, you're our early down grinder, and Henderson, you're our change of pace and receiving back. And if Stevenson doesn't fumble the ball, which he fumbled 7 times last year, didn't lose them all. If he doesn't fumble the ball and he's good in that role, they're paying him starter money. Like I said, that could be something to watch out for. If Stevenson obviously doesn't get that role, then Henderson's great at ADP, but I am very nervous about Stevenson until he starts fumbling.
Yeah, you've got a couple of these situations with the rookie running backs where there's going to be an annoying veteran presence. And can these guys overcome these veterans in order to sort of ascend? You're going to see it with Omari and Hampton, with Najee Harris around. Hampton is still, I think, a very strong bet, but I think that first 6 weeks could be very annoying. And certainly with Caleb Johnson, with Jalen Warren hanging around, that could be an annoying one as well. So we'll see which way it shakes out. But I do think Stevenson's presence is reflected in Henderson's price tag. So I think that, again, you could be right about Stevenson and I could be right about Henderson at the same time. Jim, let's do a fun exercise here. Which 3 of these offensive coordinators are you most excited about? And take this question any way you want. Give me the 3 that you know, whether it's for the storylines, the vibes, or the success on the field. 3 guys that you have circled, you're really excited to follow what happens with these offenses this season.
Obviously, even though he's the head coach, Ben Johnson, we talked about him as an offensive coordinator, which he is. I am the most excited there because this is a true opportunity for him to make something big happen. In terms of a second one, I guess maybe Grizzard. And we said I don't think he'll do much there, but I think given the players he has, whatever they do will be attached to him. So I think I'm excited to see that he keep the train on the tracks, that he doesn't mess it up, basically. And then probably the third most excited one I am, maybe Klint Kubiak, just to see if he could recreate some of that early season magic he had with the Saints.
I love that. And for me, it's Ben Johnson easily. It's one of the best storylines for us in fantasy football. Is Ben Johnson truly the chosen one? Is he a guy that can elevate a second offense to the levels we saw in Detroit? And so many fantasy football ramifications, whether it's dynasty, redraft, best ball. Can Caleb Williams take that next step under Ben Johnson? Can these wide receivers produce? Is Colston Loveland going to be like the next Sam Laporta? So much to sort of unpack there. I think for me, number 2 is Chip Kelly. What is the final arc to Chip Kelly's career? It goes from innovator to college coach, like innovative offensive coach at Oregon as a young collegiate coach, then gets the NFL head coaching job, is fantastic in terms of fantasy football success, then has this big fall from grace, reinvents himself. What does the final chapter look like? And when you factor in Ashton Jeanty and Brock Bowers' inflated ADP price tags, I'm very bullish and very excited about this. We haven't seen a winning team yet in Vegas. I think that town would absolutely go crazy this year if the Raiders really take a big step forward. Excited to see that one. And then number 3 for me is probably Klint Kubiak as well. I think he's really smart. I think he could be the next Shanahan McVay disciple, where we say, you know what? This Seattle team is actually really, really fun and really, really fun for fantasy. And Jim Coventry, you were really fun for Fantasy Football Daily today. Absolutely crushed it. Let everybody know once again where they can find your work.
Yeah, just catch me over on the X at Jim Coventry NFL, and then all the work I do is kind of shown there.
Yeah, and make sure you're tuning into all of our podcasts over here at Fantasy Points. Jagger May is going to be joining me on Fantasy Football Daily a little later in the week. Ben Gretsch is joining me on Dynasty Life. And then we've got a lot of cool stuff planned on School of Scott. Scott Barrett and I have a number of very fun guests planned for June. And I'm going to be breaking down some of our strength of schedule data with Ryan Heath over at School of Scott this week as well. We'll see you soon.